Modern preppers love gear, charts, and tactical knives, but could they survive with a cow, a root, and a spoon carved from bone? Medieval peasants did, while freezing, starving, and somehow not dying. These 13 survival tricks were tough, dirty, and completely forgotten. And wait till you see what they used instead of a mattress. Imagine sharing your bed with a cow, not because you're quirky, because it's the only way not to freeze your soul off. Welcome to medieval winter survival. Forget heated blankets and fancy thermostats, medieval peasants had one trick to make it through the night. Sleep with livestock, chickens under the straw, goats by your legs, a cow stealing half your blanket. No, it wasn't cozy, but it was warmish. That was central heating in the Dark Ages. And don't romanticize it. We're talking about cold so raw it made your teeth chatter before you even opened your eyes. The kind of cold that bit through 3 layers of wool and slapped your face like it owed it money. Their homes were stone boxes with no insulation, no glass, and just enough fire to taunt you before dying out at midnight. The smell? Oh, you want to talk about authentic aromas? Try sleeping in a room full of smoke, sweat, wet hay, and animal breath. If the cold didn't wake you up, the cow's rear end definitely would. Privacy? Non-existent. You, your parents, your kids, and a barnyard of snoring beasts, all packed into one room, wrapped in scratchy wool, praying no one rolled into a chicken. Today's preppers love their gear and solar panels. But would they crawl into bed with a goat just to survive the night? Hope you're not squeamish, because the next medieval trick involves meat, and it's not fresh. If your survival plan includes a lighter, medieval you would be toast. Or frozen toast. Back then, fire didn't come from a click or a button. It came from frustration, patience, and hitting rocks together like you were auditioning for the world's worst band. They used flint and steel, or sometimes just rubbed dry sticks until something smoked. And no, it wasn't romantic. It was sweaty, miserable, and if you did it wrong, you went to bed cold. Very cold. Imagine you've got wet hands, it's freezing, and the wind's howling like a wolf with asthma. Your only fuel is a damp pile of twigs and your last dry sock. Now start rubbing. Welcome to medieval firemaking, where success felt like a miracle and failure felt like frostbite. And here's the real kicker. They did it every day, in the dark, in the snow, often with zero margin for error. There were no backup plans, no emergency fire starter kit, no YouTube tutorial, just skill, desperation, and maybe a curse or two. And the smell when it finally caught? A glorious mix of smoke, pine resin, and pure survival. The kind of fire that made your eyes water and your soul grateful. Could you do it? Be honest. Drop a comment. How many minutes do you think you'd last trying to start a fire without a lighter or matches? And brace yourself, because the next medieval technique, it involves raw meat, smoke, and questionable hygiene. If you think instant ramen is sad, wait till you hear what counted as soup in medieval times. It's freezing, you're starving, and someone hands you a bowl of hot root water. That's it. No salt, no meat, just boiled roots, maybe a crushed onion, and if you were lucky, very lucky, some wilted herbs that smelled like dirt and disappointment. They called it soup. You'd call it flavored suffering. This daily meal was known as pottage, and it was the go-to survival dish for medieval peasants. It had the color of wet cardboard and the consistency of regret. Sometimes it was thin as tea, other times it was thick like glue, but always sad, and always necessary. There were no spices, no broth cubes, just whatever the earth gave you and enough boiling to make it softish. In bad winters, people added crushed grains, moss, even shredded bark, like a tree, because when food runs out, anything chewable becomes dinner. And you didn't eat it alone. Oh no. One pot, one spoon, one shot at survival. shared between 5, 6, even 10 people, all huddled around the fire, slurping quietly, hoping it didn't run out before it reached the end of the line. Today, people send back soup if it's a little bland. In the Middle Ages, if your soup didn't smell like roots and smoke, you probably weren't eating. And what they did with meat? That's a whole different story, and it's way harder to swallow. If your emergency water plan includes bottled spring water, medieval you would be in serious trouble. Back then, clean drinking water wasn't something you picked up in a 30-pack at the store. It was something you dug a hole for, literally. They'd bury clay jugs, sometimes called amphorae, deep in the ground to keep water from freezing solid in the winter or boiling in the summer. Medieval refrigeration? Basically just dirt and prayers. No filters, no UV purifiers, just mud, clay, and hope. You'd crawl out in the cold, dig through frozen soil, pull out a jug, and hope to find less than 3 frogs swimming inside. The smell? Damp earth, mildew, and that faint swampy punch that makes your nose wrinkle without warning. The jugs themselves were rough, handmade, porous, and full of micro cracks. And yet, they worked. The ground kept temperature stable, like nature's fridge, and they used it for everything: drinking, cooking, even storing beer that looked more like soup and smelled like regret. Now think about it. Would modern survivalists do this? Dig a pit, drop a jug, and drink whatever comes out? Or would they panic without their Nalgene and life straw? If you're still watching and thinking, I could do this, you belong here. Hit that like button and subscribe. This is your tribe. These are your people. Medieval problems, modern curiosity. And coming up next, the meat wasn't fresh, the smell was worse, and somehow they still called it food. Brace yourself. Refrigerations? Try holes in the ground and a prayer that the rats were full. In medieval times, cold storage meant digging, literally. People carved pits into the earth to stash roots, grains, and whatever they managed to hunt, kill, or trade. These were called root cellars, dark, damp, musty little spaces under the home or in the yard. No light, no shelves, just mud, stone, and a whiff of anxiety. They worked because dirt is nature's insulation. It kept food cooler in summer, warmer in winter, and just dry enough to stop everything from rotting immediately. Emphasis on immediately. Because long-term, that's where the surprises showed up. Think worms, beetles, and that one terrifying moment when a squirrel jumps out of your turnip pile. Yeah, real story, not uncommon. The smell? Picture wet potatoes, mildew, and that sweet sour stench of something that used to be food. The kind of odor that makes you squint and gag, maybe both. Imagine going down into that pit at night, holding a torch, praying your dinner isn't moving on its own. And this was normal, every day. No fridge light, no Tupperware, no Best Buy label. Would you still complain about your freezer being full? But hey, what they did with meat after that? That was on a whole other level of weird. They didn't refrigerate meat, they hung it in the ceiling and smoked it until it looked like jerky made by demons. Welcome to medieval meat preservation. You didn't eat fresh unless you just killed it. The rest? It went above the fire, literally, hung from the rafters on hooks, wires, or rope made from animal guts. Over time, the smoke worked its magic, or madness. The color turned blackish, the fat hardened, flies came and went. Sometimes so did mice, but the meat? Still technically edible, kinda. The smell? Strong, like burnt ham mixed with chimney soot. The texture? Tougher than your grandpa's belt. If you sliced it thin and boiled it into stew, it passed. But biting it raw? That was a dental emergency waiting to happen. And this wasn't a luxury. This was survival. Every cottage had smoked meat dangling from the ceiling like medieval air fresheners. Except instead of freshness, it reeked of desperation. Now think about modern preppers. Vacuum-packed protein bars. Dehydrated chicken nuggets in Mylar bags. Would they last even one dinner under a ceiling full of meat ghosts? Hope your stomach's strong, because the next method was salty, messy, and weirdly effective. Block 8. Salt was more valuable than gold. You think you love salt on your fries? In medieval times, salt was worth more than your entire pantry. Salt wasn't seasoning, it was survival. Without it, food spoiled fast. In a world with no fridges, no plastic wrap, no preservatives, salt was the difference between dinner and diarrhea. They salted meat. They salted fish. They even salted vegetables. If you had a lot of salt, people assumed you had money. Big money. Salt was traded, stolen, worshipped, and in some places even taxed like gold. Wars were fought over salt. Relationships ended over salt. People literally died trying to steal it. It was white, chunky, and rough. Not that fine table stuff you shake out of a plastic container. This was gritty, earthy salt, dug from rocks or evaporated from brine, often with flecks of dirt and minerals still clinging to it. It didn't just preserve food, it burned wounds, cleaned tools, and even kept evil spirits away. And don't get it twisted, salt wasn't easy to come by. In winter, salt production could stop completely. That meant rationing what little you had left, using it only on the most important items, like the meat hanging in the ceiling or the last root you didn't want to rot. Ever panic when the salt shaker's empty? Imagine knowing that without salt, your entire food stockpile could turn into a pile of compost. And as for keeping warm, forget electric blankets. What came next was itchy, smoky, and absolutely necessary. Imagine sleeping in the same clothes you wore all day and all week and maybe all month. That was standard in the medieval world. You didn't change into pajamas. Your day wear was your night wear. Tunics, cloaks, wool wraps, everything you wore, you slept in. These clothes weren't soft. They were scratchy, heavy, and usually smelled like a mix of smoke, sweat, and maybe goat. Wool was the fabric of survival. It held heat even when damp, blocked the wind, and could be layered like medieval onions. Some pieces were so thick they could practically stand on their own. Cloaks doubled as blankets, hoods became pillows, and mittens were whatever you wrapped your hands in that didn't already belong to someone else. Laundry? Please. You'd wash your clothes maybe once every few weeks, if the river wasn't frozen and you weren't too busy not starving. And these weren't fashion statements. This was functional layering, and if you didn't do it right, you froze. People wrapped their legs in strips of cloth. They stuffed hay into boots. Some even tied furs around their waist like medieval fanny packs, but with dead animals. If you're still here, still nodding like, yup, I could totally survive that, then you need to stick around. Share this video with someone who thinks camping in a hoodie is rough, and hit subscribe if you're one of us. This is medieval survival, and it's only getting wilder, because the next survival hack, it involved fruit that wasn't edible until it rotted. What kind of fruit do you pick, ignore, and then eat after it rots? In medieval times, that was just called dessert. Meet the medlar, a bizarre winter fruit that looks like a tiny brown tomato, tastes like apple meets wine meets fermented regret, and had to be half rotten to be edible. No, seriously, if you bit into it too early, it was like chewing a sour wooden sponge. But once it turned soft, brown, and a little gooey, it became a survival treat. This wasn't a mistake, it was strategy. The medlar was one of the few fruits you could harvest in late fall and let ripen after picking, outdoors, in the cold. This process was called bledding. Sounds fancy, it wasn't. It just meant letting it rot until it was mushy enough to eat without breaking a tooth. The smell? Earthy, boozy, a little off. The taste? Strange. Sweet, tangy, weirdly creamy. Not delicious, but edible. And in winter, that was enough. Modern folks toss bananas the second they get brown spots. Medieval peasants waited for their fruit to look like it lost a bar fight. and then they ate it with both hands. Would you do it? Could you? That's winter survival medieval style. And speaking of strange architecture, they didn't build on the ground next, they built in it. If your dream home includes a skylight, insulation, and curb appeal, you would have hated medieval earth shelters. These homes weren't just close to nature, they were buried in it. People dug structures into hillsides or built partially underground to trap heat and block wind. No heaters, no insulation foam, just dirt walls and smart desperation. Why? Because it worked. The earth holds temperature. It stays warmer in winter, cooler in summer, and acts like a natural thermos. You step inside, and it's dark, dry, and not freezing. That's a win. Inside, it was quiet. Creepy quiet. The walls were cold and rough. The floors? Packed dirt or old stone. Furniture? Basic. And the smell? A mix of damp clay, smoke, and old wool. Nothing fancy, just survival in bunker mode. They weren't cozy, but they didn't need to be. These homes were battle stations against hypothermia, and they worked. Imagine living like that today. No lights, no AC, just silence, shadows, and the hope that your roof didn't collapse during a storm. But how did they keep food and drinks going through all that? Simple, they fermented everything, and we mean everything. Imagine opening a clay jar and finding dinner, a drink, or a biohazard. That's medieval fermentation. They didn't just ferment wine or cheese, they fermented vegetables, milk, fruit, grains, anything that wouldn't survive the week on its own. Why? Because fermentation wasn't just preservation, it was transformation. They used wild yeasts, old barrels, linen cloths, and lots of luck. Cabbage turned into sour, crunchy kraut. Milk became tangy curds or soft, fizzy drinks. Apples became something almost like cider, unless the jar exploded first. Yeah, fermentation could blow up. Gases built pressure. Lids popped. Sometimes people got a face full of medieval smoothie when they opened the wrong jar. Still worth it. The smell? Sharp, acidic, sometimes amazing, sometimes terrifying. It depended on what you were trying to make and what actually grew inside. Modern folks talk about probiotics. Medieval people called it lunch, and it kept them alive through winters, famines, and wars. But when things went wrong, they didn't run to a pharmacy. Nope. Next, they turned to leaves, flowers, and raw pain tolerance. Nylon, that's cute. Medieval people made ropes from weeds and tree guts, and they actually worked. When you needed rope in the Middle Ages, you didn't go to the store, you went to the forest. Vines, bark strips, flax, hemp, nettle, anything long and fibrous became raw material. And yes, they twisted roots together like cable, by hand, in the cold, with zero machinery. It wasn't just eco-friendly, it was the only option. They used ropes to tie houses, haul wood, fish, trap animals, hang meat, and sometimes people. These ropes weren't pretty. They frayed. They stank. They were scratchy and rough. But they held strong. Strong enough to drag logs and support roofs. Making rope was a whole job. You soaked the fibers, beat them flat, then twisted them into long cords while walking backward in a muddy field. Romantic, right? The smell? Earthy, sour, and faintly moldy. The texture? Like holding dry seaweed wrapped in burlap. Modern ropes come with tensile strength ratings. Medieval ones came with a prayer and a shrug. Could you build a shelter with plant guts? Could you hang your food with vines and hope it doesn't crash down in the middle of the night? Because next, they didn't reach for Tylenol. They reached for weeds, teas, and a shocking amount of faith. No pills, no prescriptions, just leaves, roots, and a good guess. That was medieval medicine. When you got sick in the Middle Ages, you didn't head to CVS, you headed outside. Fever? Chamomile. Infection? Sage. Cramps? Nettle tea. That itchy rash you don't want to talk about? Probably crushed mint Or maybe a cold mud wrap. No guarantees. They used plants for everything. Bark for pain relief, flowers for sleep, mushrooms for, well, sometimes they helped. Sometimes they sent you on a spirit journey. It was trial and error, heavy on the error. These weren't herbal supplements. These were life or death improvisations, passed down by memory, not manuals. The smell of dried herbs filled kitchens. Teas boiled constantly. Salves were sticky, gritty, and smelled like wet hay with garlic. There was no one pill cures all, just one plant that might help. If not, try another. If that fails, time to pray. Modern survivalists love gear. Medieval folks had nettles and guts. Ever tried drinking nettle tea made in a pot that's also used to wash feet? They did, regularly. And after all this, one question remains. Would you survive it? If you thought you knew how to survive, think again. They didn't have gadgets, no solar panels, no dehydrated food kits or filtered water bottles, no tactical flashlights, multi-tools, or YouTube tutorials, just ancestral knowledge, raw endurance, and hunger. Real hunger, the kind that makes soup out of bark and dinner out of moldy fruit. Every fire took effort. Every meal was a gamble. Every winter night was a battle against frostbite, starvation, or worse. They weren't prepping for fun. They were surviving because they had no other option. No plan B, no shortcuts, just frostbite, firewood, and instincts older than maps. And yet, somehow, they made it. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. But what if the world flipped tomorrow? Would you remember this, or freeze trying to light a fire? The real test? It hasn't started yet. Subscribe and join the brotherhood that guards the forgotten wisdom of fire, stone, and storm. What ancient trick spoke to your soul today? Share it below. Your words may awaken others. Let your like be a torch passed forward, a vow to protect the echoes of the past. Spread this tale like sparks in the wind. Somewhere, someone needs this knowledge. And follow the path to the next story. A secret, nearly buried in time, is waiting.